Well, hello, and welcome to Beyond the Sermon, a Bethany podcast, where we have the privilege of digging deeper into our Sunday messages. I'm Tammy DeLau, and today I'm joined with Pastor David Baxley and Pastor Steve Musto. I'm so glad to have you guys back.
For now.
For now. I mean, summer is happening.
Summer is crazy.
Yeah, so next week we're going to be gone.
Oh, we're both gone.
Yeah, we're both gone.
Oh my goodness, yes.
So we got something else planned.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
That's good. So fear not.
Fear not.
All right. All right.
Yeah,
Well, we're in a new series, and David has a lot of content. So let's jump in, guys.
All right.
So I just said David has a lot of content. And I know whenever we're talking about King David or reading about David, my brain thinks this David.
Yeah.
So can we give you a nickname today? Or how can
Okay, so let's just be clear, because we're talking about King David for the next 2 weeks,
Right.
but David is not preaching.
Yes, that's right.
For the next
I'm not
2
free
weeks,
yet.
right?
There you go.
Which makes it even more confusing
that's
when
right.
David
Yeah.
speaks on David.
That's right, because you're, okay,
Yeah.
so I need a vacation.
I know.
All right, here we got.
So let's go.
Let's record this and
So we are in a series that we're going to carry out through the summer, where we are going to look at the kings of the nation of Israel from both kingdoms, both
Israel
in
and Judah. Yep.
Yep, from both northern and southern. And so for the next 2 weeks, we are going to be looking specifically at King David. So I know you two for sure grew up in a church. I kind of came in, when I was 11, so didn't grow up. So let's just talk about what we know about David, like maybe his lineage, who he is, stories we remember.
I love stories of King David. There are two that are my favorite. I always how David handled Saul in those moments where he could have taken Saul's life. We were talking about that the other day. And then also how David handled when he was being mocked, when he was chased out of Jerusalem.
Okay.
And how he handled that. That's one of I would love to be able to demonstrate the character of David in my life in those moments.
So when you say how he handled Saul, because for those who didn't grow up in church, how did he handle Saul? What does that mean?
Yeah, well, David, which we'll get to the beginning of this in David's story, but David gets anointed by God to be the king that replaces King Saul. We talked about Saul last week. But there was a long progression of time between when David was called to be king and when he was actually became king. And Saul is the king during that time. And Saul goes after David multiple times to try to kill him. And yet in those moments, under David's wisdom, he had chances where he could have taken Saul out. And I just love that statement he makes, that he will not raise his hand against the one God had anointed. That it was God's timing and God's way, not in David's hand to do that. And it almost seems like, well, why didn't you do it? You already knew God told you to be king. I'm sure you'll get to that different message, but that's one of my favorite things also about David's character. Yeah.
I think that one of the things that intrigues me, I think lineage intrigues me, probably because of my own story a little bit, but knowing that within his lineage, being from the tribe of Judah, that he has Ruth and he has Rahab as part of his lineage.
Yeah.
And knowing who they were.
Right.
And so that always encourages me.
Yeah, the book of Ruth ends with a genealogy. And it ends, the genealogy sets up David. Even though we're not going to talk about King David for several chapters in 1 Samuel, which comes after it, it sets up the whole idea of the Davidic line and the Davidic kingdom, that Ruth is his great-grandmother.
Yeah.
So Jesse, David's father, that Ruth is his grandmother. So, I mean, it's possible that Jesse would have known her, and he's like one of the heroes of the Bible.
Yeah, I know.
Remarkable.
Such a cool.
So I love that.
Connection.
Also, just knowing I'm right now in my reading through the Bible in a year in the Psalms. And so knowing that, I think he is attributed to about 73 of the 150. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
When you think of David.
Oh man, there's so many good stories. I think what I love about David is that he's a warrior poet.
Yeah.
How does that work?
How does that work? There are not a lot of, when you think of like a warrior, like a Navy SEAL kind of guy, these are not, but combat was so brutal and so bloody that you had to have something inside you where you could turn that on and off.
Right.
Yeah.
And he could do that, but at the same time, he could sit down and pen these beautiful songs and poems to God and about God. And
Yeah, you see the warrior David come through in some of those sometimes.
It's an interesting mix of giftedness, and he's an intriguing, complicated man. And I probably one of the most wanted men of the Bible. When everybody gets to heaven, we're going to be crowding each other to get to some of these folks. And I think David's line is going to be really long to get to,
When I think of when I was reading today that he talks about being a shepherd boy first before all of this happened, and literally with his hands coming after lions and bears. And so as I'm reading, you guys are going to laugh, I'm hearing from the Wizard of Oz, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And I'm thinking, were there tigers? So very
and even in that, David, as a teenager, when he talks about the story we're going to look at is the famous story of David and the giant Goliath, and the way he turns a phrase to Saul when Saul says, "You can't fight him." Goliath is an older man who's in the prime of his life, and he's been battling since he's young. Who are you? And David says, the God who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the paw of that animal. Just the way, as a teenager, he's able to think in those terms and puts it so poetically. So really cool.
And you know me, I'm always looking for symbolism and where Jesus is. Am I right, guys, that David was born in Bethlehem?
Yeah.
And so was Jesus.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Which is how Jesus ends up in Bethlehem, being born in Bethlehem. Because there's the census.
You have to go back to the home.
Back to your homeland. So where's your homeland?
Okay.
And so Mary and Joseph have to go back to where the family is from. And that's how they end up there.
Is there anything else before we dive into more discussion that you feel like we need to talk about David?
No, I mean, just knowing a little bit about his family. So we don't know a ton about them.
His mother's never mentioned.
No, Jesse was dad, and this is pretty typical in ancient literature, that the men would be mentioned, and 8 sons in that family. They seem to be decent enough fellas.
And he was the baby.
He's the youngest son.
I was thinking of that today. We have 6 sons, and we are going to go on a camping trip this week, and it is crazy. And the bear cubbing and the wrestling that even my grown men do.
Yeah.
I can't imagine poor Jesse.
Yeah.
With 8 children and 8 boys wrestling and doing all the boy things. So.
And probably we make a little bit too much of the whole. Samuel comes to anoint. He doesn't know who. One of Jesse's sons, and 7 of the sons go before him, and it's like, well, that's it. That's the kids. Is that it? Are you sure there's not one more son? Well, I mean, there's one, but he's the youngest. He's out in the field, and he almost seems like an afterthought. And we probably have sold Jesse a little short on that, or the family a little short. David, it's not that they had forgotten that this kid existed. Yeah. It's that he was very young. And they would not have thought in their culture of introducing this what they picture as a child to this important man like a prophet and a judge of Israel. So it would have not been important to them. So it would
have been like in the days where little boys wore knickers and they weren't really considered men until they wore pants. Like David was still in his knickers.
That's good. Yeah. He's in his knickers phase.
Well, that's just a view of David I've just never had before.
Hey, I'll do it.
He's got one of those great big lollipops. And
oh, no.
Got a hat with ribbons on it.
What if the bears were going after him, man?
Oh, my goodness. All right. So we're doing kings, and David will be the second king. Why was David chosen? Why did we need a second king? There has to be some events that got us to this place.
Yeah, I thought Tyler did a phenomenal job last week of introducing this topic to us and of getting us into who Saul is and what happened in his life. And, Saul's handpicked by God to be the king of Israel. And so God doesn't pick him to fail. God picks him to succeed. He has everything he needs to succeed. It is Saul's own heart that turns against God and inwardly onto himself. And so as a result of that, God is going to do something really interesting. He's going to take not only the kingdom away from Saul, but take it away from his family. This is a huge deal in those days. To take the kingship away from a royal line is an offense. So it's one thing if you get killed and your kid takes over for you, or a cousin twice removed or whatever. As long as they're in the line, it's okay. But when the lineage is broken, it's an affront to you as the kid. When you're the one who's in charge, and you're so bad that the lineage is taken away, that's huge. And so that's what happens to Saul.
So is that what plays into Saul's hatred for David then? Knowing that it's going to be taken away?
I'm sure that's part of it. Part of it is jealousy. Part of it is an aging. How often do you see this in the sports world, in the celebrity world, or in the pastor world or whatever, where the young buck comes in and is getting all the attention, and the old star is there and used to be something, but can't quite do what, the old gray mare ain't what she used to be. And so now this stud is kind of in there, and there's a natural jealousy. So that's part of it. I think another part of it is, Saul's been told the kingdom has been taken away from him, and now that makes him paranoid. But let's not also forget there's a demonic presence here. We were told that very clearly on more than one occasion, that there's a possession of some kind, or certainly oppression that is happening spiritually to Saul. He's listening to voices he should not be listening to. And something takes over him.
He seeks voices he should not have been seeking.
That's exactly right. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
And so he's going to lose everything. Think about it this way. So if you read Kings, I certainly hope everybody does, reads Kings and Chronicles as we go through this series, but count the number of times that years after David is dead, we are told God at that time was going to just bring an end to this. But for his servant David, who served him faithfully, God allowed another king to come to the throne. So hundreds of years after David, God is still granting to the Israelite people some measure of grace and mercy because of the faithfulness of this king, and allowing the lineage to go on. And so you see what goodness, what a faithful king, leader, ruler can do, and what an unfaithful ruler like Saul is going to do. And of course, the kingship of David never ends, because it gets carried on in Jesus. Jesus is the king. He's the forever king, and he is of the line of David. And so David's lineage continues even today. How cool is that?
Yeah.
It is really cool.
Yeah.
So this is a random question. I know we're talking about the tribes and being from Judah and David and all of those things. And we know that Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, I believe. Do our Jewish brothers and sisters now know what tribe they came from? Is that important to them?
No, not so much.
Okay.
Mostly that's been lost.
Okay.
And it pretty much it started to get lost when the two countries split from each other.
Okay.
And then it got even more lost when the countries
were exiled.
Got taken over by Assyria. Israel got taken by Assyria, and Judah got taken by Persia. Babylon, then Persia. Yeah. And at that point, they're just trying to stay together. They're just trying to keep some Jewishness. Yeah. And so little by little, the tribal thing but it had started to get a little bit intermingled more than and it was okay. That's okay. God had never said don't marry outside your tribe. It was okay to marry within the kingdom of Israel. Just don't marry outside the kingdom of Israel. Yeah. Today, that's really not a thing.
Okay. So I know one of the things that we do is we talk about things that you're not going to be able to talk about in service. And so someone may be wondering, okay, we have a biblical conundrum here. So I'm going to try to state it. In chapter 16, David enters Saul's service as a musician. So he's helping him, calming him down with his little lyre. In the very next chapter, Saul seems to have no idea who David is. I've always wondered, what's the disconnect? What's going on? Help me understand that.
So we're talking about 1 Samuel 16.
Yep.
David gets anointed king in secret. Nobody can know because Saul is nuts. Then soon after that, David enters Saul's service still in 16 as a musician. He comes in as a musician, and he would play, and it would calm Saul down, right? So that's 16. In 17 is one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It is David and Goliath. David shows up on the scene, and Saul, at the end of the story, after David has been victorious, he seems to ask, who is this kid?
Yeah.
That's actually not the question he asks. Yeah, let's talk about some possibilities. So, ready?
Okay.
Okay.
I asked the questions, so you two do the possibilities.
Well, I mean, one of the possibilities you're alluding to, Steve, is the actual question he's asking is, who? Tell me the lineage of this kid. What the family is he a part of? What is the reputation of this family? How should I understand who this person is outside of just this name?
Because the question I think he asks is, who's his dad?
Yeah.
Who's this man's father? Now, there's a more practical reason why he might ask that. And that's because the reward for killing Goliath is you get to marry the king's daughter, which goes to David, but the family is exempt from taxes in Israel. So it's possible Saul is asking the tax question, the question like, okay, who are we eliminating from the tax roll?
Who won the lottery today?
Yeah, that's kind of, it's possible.
Okay.
It's also possible that Saul is so muddled that somebody this inferior in his court, who's just a musician, he wouldn't have had, it's a large court, so these are big rooms. He would not have paid any attention to who's in the band.
Which is crazy, unless this hasn't happened yet. If I have a headache and someone plays and I feel wonderful and I no longer have a headache, I think I'd take notice of that. So it seems bizarre to me that he wouldn't have taken notice.
Yeah, but not if you have this streak in you of intense self-focus.
Okay.
And that's what Saul's turned inward at this point. And so there's part of that. So these are possible. The other possibility, and this is a little less likely, but the prophets who are putting together the book of 1 Samuel, they're not concerned with chronology like we are.
Yes.
That's
Which
our world.
You guys have both taught us
we've
that
talked
before
about this
a lot.
So it's possible that they're just putting the chronology slightly different than it was. But I
actually lean that direction.
Okay.
If I had to pick, I don't think it matters that much, but if I had to pick, just because there's little subtle things in here, like in verse 18, when it describes David, I've seen Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He's also a valiant man, a warrior, elegant, handsome, and the Lord is with him. There's almost a shift even already of how we talked about David in the first half of 16 to there, almost like apparently his reputation grew a lot. Well, so other events potentially happened in the first half of 16 versus the second half of 16. And so we're getting this more summary of David. Here's how David enters the scene. Here's what we know about David and seeing his character. Now let's start to tell his story.
Yeah. And that makes sense from this standpoint. How does a shepherd boy get to be known as a valiant warrior?
That's the key. That's the key thing in there that seems different, because
he's not in the army.
No,
we know he's not in the army in 17.
In 17, he's not engaged as a valiant warrior yet. Yes.
So these are all possible. These are the things that that Bible scholars like to talk about and think through. But it does this, and I just want to say it can cause a little bit of consternation for others. Like, well, wait a second.
Can we trust this?
Yeah, can we trust this? What's going on here? And we just have to say, well, their value is not our value.
And that's why I love when we do this, because I do worry about people's hearts. You read something like that and you're like, wait a minute, something's fishy here.
Yeah.
And it's not something as fishy here.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Yep. Their intent is always telling the best story.
Yep.
So they're going to tell it in
They're good storytellers.
in the order that that makes for the best story.
And it has to do more with the moral lesson that they're wanting us to understand more than the story of the chronological element of the story.
Correct.
Yeah.
So as I was reading today, I just find myself in awe that you've got brothers in a war and you send your young child to go bring food. Like, I don't think Samuel would have been going to war with Andrew or our children. was that commonplace? Like, I just find that so odd.
Yeah. So the beginning of this, it seems like the brothers have all gone to war. David is not. And this is, again, I've heard messages preached on this.
Okay.
Well, David is so little thought of that he's not even allowed to join the army. Okay. We're taking liberties with the text here when we say stuff like that.
Right.
I am way more comfortable saying this. That being in the army at this point is voluntary. It is possible that because David is in charge of the sheep, which, yes, is not a glamorous job, but it's still a job that has to be done.
Right.
And there has to be a family member there to do this. And he's probably the chief shepherd of all the other shepherds. We don't know how wealthy Jesse was, but there could have been a lot of sheep, maybe hundreds involved in this. So somebody has to stay home. There's also years ago, I was on staff of a church. We were going to a conference together. We were all flying out to Colorado. And we were doing this thing on the way to the airport. We were like, what seat are you in? What seat are you in? And then we looked around. We realized that our lead pastor was not there. We're like, oh boy, but isn't he going? Yes, he's going. Well, why isn't he going with us? Well, he and a couple other people of our key people are taking a different flight. Why? Safety. Because if anything happened to us, if our flight went down, and the entire staff was on that flight, all the pastors were on that flight, that's a problem.
That's wise.
The church is kind of decapitated for a while. And so, companies do this, organizations do this. This is just sort of routine. So it's possible that if all of your other sons are going to war and you don't know what the outcome is going to be, you do want to have one back who can continue the family line. That's a possibility. And it's also possible that he was young. Maybe he wasn't considered to be this type of guy. And so they're all different things.
Well, there was an age that was common to enter the military. And so that could also be a part of it.
Yeah, David may have been just too young.
My wonderment was, I know we talk about in the New Testament, if you were in jail, you needed, your family and friends brought you food. Did the family help feed? Like, I was just curious, like, was that why he was sent? Because, was he just feeding his brothers?
Yeah, this is a volunteer army, and they didn't necessarily receive wages. Your wages were what you plundered. That's what you could take from the dead and from the towns that you overran. That's you took that, and so that could be very lucrative if you were in a good army. This is not a good army, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the message. What's going on and what has happened, and how come this is so astonishing an outcome for the Israelites to win this particular battle. But yeah, there's all kinds of explanations there. We just don't know what they are. So anything else is conjecture, I guess. For whatever reason, David was back home.
Okay. So I don't know that we've talked about it on the podcast, but I know we've talked about it together. You talking about David being plan D, God's plan D.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us just a little insight on that? Because I have a question for you after that.
Yeah. So God's plan A, Tyler did a great job with this past week. God's plan A is that he's the king of Israel. Nobody else has this deal. No one's ever seen anything like this. Just think about this for a second. Yahweh is going to be your king. There's never going to be a successor. You're never going to have to worry about, the good king dying and his crazy nephew Skippy coming in and being the king. Like, oh no, what's he going to do? You don't have to worry about any of this. God is the king. He's perfectly just. He fights all the battles. You don't have to march out. God, just stand back and watch God wipe out your enemies if anybody tries to touch you. He's going to make sure everything is fine in the kingdom. This is like, for those who are old enough, this is Camelot. This is a beautiful picture of what is supposed to happen. Well, the people reject that. And so what God allows, that's plan A. They reject plan A. What God allows then is plan B. Plan B is for God to continue to reign, but for there to be these human representatives, judges. And so the Judges is the book of Judges, all about God's representatives who are there to help shepherd the people away and lead the people out of the sin that they're in and rescue them from the trouble they've gotten themselves into, mostly from the Philistines and the Ammonites. And then they reject that. They come to Samuel and they say, we want a king. And Samuel gets his feelings hurt. He's like, well, I'm the judge. Like, aren't I good enough? And that's where God has a conversation with him, says, hey, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. Because I was plan A, remember? You're plan B. They're not rejecting plan B. They're rejecting ultimately plan A. So he gives them a king, warns them, gives them a king. That's Saul. Saul's plan C. David is plan D. We elevate David as being, this must be like the best and the brightest. This is not God's plan and God's idea. And everything that happens after David is the fruit of this poison tree. We are going to see, even though David's a wonderful man, a godly man, and a great king, he's going to mess up a bunch of different things. And we'll talk about that in 2 weeks in the message.
Okay.
But he's going to have a hard time, and it's because he's really not supposed to be there.
So am I hearing you say that if they would have went with plan A, it could have just been plan A and God was their king and we wouldn't have seen these other characters the same way? How does that work with God's sovereignty and foreknowledge? And I mean, like, my brain is, I know, I'm opening a can of worms, I know, but...
Well, so go back to Abraham. What did God, we don't know exactly how it would have worked. What God told Abraham was that I'm going to establish you. I'm going to be your God. Your people are going to be my people. And I'm going to bless the world, the entire earth through you. Your non-family members are going to be blessed through you. And so Jesus is always in the mix. Jesus is always going to be the plan.
So Jesus was never plan B.
And Jesus was never plan B because sin has to be atoned for. Absolutely. And that's got to happen. However, how it would have happened, what would have happened, and somehow, and I think we get a picture of this in Revelation, somehow what is happening in Israel is supposed to, the goodness of it is supposed to spread.
Okay.
And become. And instead of conquering people with war and overcoming people and expanding territory that way, with God on the throne, what would have spread was peace and joy and justice and all of these things.
And maybe for the sake of a different word, I think that they find unity, but in our brains, we can do different things with them. Maybe we think of will A, will B, will C. We often will use that phrase. And the reason I say this is because even in the Old Testament law, if I'm remembering this correctly, God speaks to how kings should function.
Yep.
So in the law,
he knows.
where he's establishing who he is as his plan A, as you worded it, he's saying, this is my plan A, but when you do this, because you're going to do this,
right?
Here's how you do the king thing. And so we see that this picture of, and actually, I think it's more of a beauty of understanding God's sovereignty, where we understand where God's perfect will is the phrase people use sometimes, whatever it is. We don't play with words,
used
but
the word permissive will last week.
That's a phrase people we can go back and forth with.
Okay.
But I don't think we want to unpack that right now. Right? It seems so we're like, David, no. But just go with that idea without getting to those extra details. But just the idea that God is not. I don't want it to seem like God's reacting. God is proactive in all of this.
Okay.
God is working in all of this. And I think that's where that sovereignty feels like there's tension. And however God is working well and plan, he shows us even all the way back to the law, all the way back to Abraham. I'm going to do this. The law reminds us that this is the way I would design this to be. In the same way I designed the garden to be like this. I've still got this plan I'm going to do. I designed you guys to be like this. I've still got the plan worked out how I'm going to do this. Because that's the beauty of God. He's always redeeming our brokenness. Into his plan to accomplish things for his glory and invite us back into that even when we step away from it. I think that's the heart of this narrative.
Let's here's an illustration, just if this helps. Right now, we have construction on 16, and there are basically two ways to drive to church. Okay, so you can go Yeah, I don't even remember all the. You can go, County Road B, is it up by West Salem?
Yeah,
or whatever.
you can come on the West Salem route or far south to Crosse.
Yeah, or to come down Gillette, go through the industrial park and Gillette. Yeah. Okay, there are two ways to get there. That when we say like we're going to church, we're taking one of those two ways. Now, we can quibble. I ride my bike. I take a slightly different view or slightly different way here. I guess if you had a helicopter, you could get here. So what total? Maybe there's 5 or 6 different ways if we invented.
Let's just pretend we're in cars.
Yeah. But if we're in cars, we're limited.
Right.
How many different ways do you think God could get from any of our houses to church? Well, it's unlimited ways. He has unlimited ways because he's not limited by any of the things that we are. And so we look at things like plans and we say, well, here are the 4 different plans we can use. Yeah. We're limited by these. God has 0 limits on him. 0 limits. Infinite number of ways for us to get to this, from this place to this place. And so it's hard for us to figure out what God would have done because we don't have access to the unlimited nature of his mind.
He was going to honor the covenant that he made with Abraham, and he had infinite ways to do it, is what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, despite it being broken.
Okay.
And I would come back, had established this ultimately as the path, as we see him articulate all the way back in the law when the theocracy was still in play, when it was just God. He's already articulating essentially a path that he's going to walk this, knowing the hearts of his people.
So let me bring us in for a landing.
I'm going to make you guys talk to me after when we're done. Sorry, guys.
People were like, Josh, hit record.
If you find yourself in a place and you don't know what God is doing because the job is not coming through, finances are not coming through, the relationship you thought was going to be there is not there anymore, the life as you pictured it is not turning out the way you thought, any of these things, it is really tempting to want to go back and replay, well, if I would have done this, maybe if I wouldn't have done this, maybe if I wouldn't have married this person, maybe if I wouldn't have made this decision, maybe this is punishment for something I'm going, it's like, okay, time out. Let's remember we serve an infinite God. He has infinite ways to get us where he wants us to go, and nothing can stop him from achieving what it is that he wants to achieve. So submit ourselves to him. And the best, one of the best examples of this is King David himself, who is anointed king and can see, I'm sure, his life laid out in front of him. This is how it's going to go. This is going to be so great. And for 13 years, nothing turns out the way he wanted it to. And his family is threatened, and an entire city, men, women, and children are slaughtered by Saul. And that weighs on his conscience because of David, because of who he is. And people are lost, and people are angry, and he loses his best friend. And like all of these things are happening. And there are these moments, read the Psalms, there are these moments where he goes, God, what are you doing? What are you doing? I love you. I serve you. I'm trying to do the right thing. And so if you find yourself in that place, you are not alone. We have this wonderful archetype in this guy named King David who knows exactly what that's like and has been through that in his own life.
That's good. That's really good. So if we're feeling like we're living plan D and we want to go back to plan A, we see God in the
God is there.
Yep, that's really good. I think I'm going to miss you guys next week, but I'm pretty excited to go on vacations.
All right.
So thank you for today, and thank you for joining us. Have a great week. Bye-bye.